Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Samuel Metellus. This is EDL 851, Module 12, Case Study. Teacher react negatively to personal evaluation. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Section 1, we're going to talk about the summary of the case, the facts, the 5Ws, what is happening in the case. The building principal observed Mrs. Stevens' classroom and noticed that the students were not on task and were not motivated to learn. During the post-observation meeting, Mrs. Stevens was not receptive of criticism. The principal decided to observe Mrs. Stevens again, and there was no improvement. The principal recommended that Mrs. Stevens' contract not to be renewed. Mrs. Stevens pushed back and claimed that the evaluation was unfair and that the supervision at the school failed her. What didn't happen? The principal did not try to reason with Mrs. Stevens. The principal did not provide any support or advice on how Mrs. Stevens can improve her classroom management and student engagement. No immediate feedback was given during the second observation. The principal did not ask Mrs. Stevens about her opinion on the lessons observed. The principal did not provide any positive feedback or words of encouragement to Mrs. Stevens. Summary continue. Who was involved? We are aware of two people so far in the case study, the building principal and Mrs. Stevens. When? There was no specific date listed, but conflict happened after the second post-observation meeting. Where? Unknown, school district and location. What those involved has to say. Mrs. Stevens feels like the school failed her by not providing support and thinks that the principal observation is flawed. She also threatened to sue for lack of supervision by the school and the principal's decision not to renew her contract. The principal believes that Mrs. Stevens struggled with classroom management and motivating students. The principal also thinks that Mrs. Stevens does not respond well to criticism. The principal does not want to renew Mrs. Stevens' contract. Summary continue. Standard evidence. This case study promotes the well-being of students because if students are not motivated to learn, a decision needs to be made to change things around. The principal is trying to increase the school capacity by not recommending an ineffective teacher for another year. This case study made me realize how the importance of a collaborative professional manner. I learned a lot from reading this case study and I discovered ways to develop an effective system of supervision, support, and evaluation designed to promote school improvement and student success. Legal: Mrs. Stevens can potentially sue the school for wrongful termination. Ethical: the principal feels like she hired a great group of teachers except for Mrs. Stevens. This can be seen as Mrs. Stevens was being targeted unfairly. The principal provided no actionable feedback to Mrs. Stevens in order for her to improve. Who was armed? I think Mrs. Stevens was armed as she felt like the school district failed her because of the lack of supervision and support. She could potentially be involved in a nasty lawsuit and also loses her job. Breach of contract: there was no breach of contract that was listed from the case study. There was no sign of discrimination or harassment presented in this case study since there was very little information that was revealed about demographics. Section 3. What has happened? At an unknown school, following two negative teachers' observations, the principal decided not to renew Mrs. Stevens' contract, which leads to her irritated as she felt like that she received very little support and supervision as she threatened to take legal action. Section 4. Evaluate the missing facts. So what is missing from this case study? We're going to start with places. There was nothing mentioned about the specific location of the school district, which state, which grade level, what is the name of the city, how is the economy there. Those information could have helped with the context in this case. Programs. What type of programs does school offer for teachers? Is there an induction program for new teachers or the teacher mentorship program? Are there professional learning program? Does bad evaluation lead straight to firing? What is the protocol? There was no improvement plan program mentioned also. People. Are there any other teachers in Mrs. Stevens' grade level team? Other people from leadership team beside the principal? How long Mrs. Stevens has been teaching at the school? The other teachers that the principal have hired, how many were, how long they have been at the school, how many did he hire? Those missing information are crucial to fully understand the case study, as the information presented was vague and lack of context. Section 5. Review and prioritize the information. The principal observed Mrs. Stevens a second time before completing the teacher evaluation form and noticed no improvement in Mrs. Stevens' teaching practices. According to the principal, the students are not motivated to learn, and there is a lack of classroom management in Mrs. Stevens' class. The principal rated Mrs. Stevens below average in personality, professional interest, attitude, and teaching ability. The principal decided not to renew Mrs. Stevens' contract, therefore denying her tenure. Mrs. Stevens argued that the observation was unfair as she received no supervision or support from the principal and threatened to take legal action. Section 6. How would I handle the situation? If that was me as the principal, I would have completed Mrs. Stevens' observation earlier and involve others such as assistant principal, etc. I will also provide Mrs. Stevens with professional learning opportunities to help with students' motivation and classroom management. Professional learning is tailored based on specific learning needs of students, teachers, and school districts. I will allow Mrs. Stevens to participate in learning walks and observe other classroom teachers, which will promote collaboration. I will conduct both pre and post observation meetings with immediate actionable feedbacks. Leaders have to provide immediate actionable feedback that is specific, targeted for employee development. If the observation is still below average, I will assign Mrs. Stevens a mentor next school year with a plan of improvement that has goals that are measurable and attainable. Evaluating my action plan. The pros, let's start with the pros. Mrs. Stevens will receive proper supervision that will enhance her teaching and students' achievements. There will be actionable feedback. This will prevent a lawsuit, which will protect the image of the school. Mrs. Stevens will increase their capacity by collaborating with peers during learning walks. In peers observation, Mrs. Stevens will be engaged in professional learning instead of professional development. In contrast, the cons of my action plan, it will be time consuming, requires a lot of planning. The school might not have the resources for professional learning in order to go to assign a mentor to Mrs. Stevens because of staff shortages. Mrs. Stevens might refuse supervision and could be a toxic person and could still want to sue the school after a bad evaluation. This plan did not take account the hiring of a new teacher if things went left with Mrs. Stevens. Section 8. Develop my action plan. Based on the information I have, the best option would be to restart from the beginning and conduct Mrs. Stevens' observation earlier in the school year and not wait the last minute to ensure that I have more time for the action plan. The process of my decision was based on the research and analyzing data of what would be best way to increase Mrs. Stevens' intellectual capacity, which will increase student achievement. I will make sure that Mrs. Stevens receive actionable feedback, which includes not only criticism but also praises and words of encouragement. My action plan will be the best option for teachers, students, and community in the school district. Section 9. How I will implement the plan. Step 1. I will move Mrs. Stevens' observation earlier in the year to allow more time for the action plan. Step 2. I will provide actionable feedback to Mrs. Stevens. This includes learning work and peer observation. I will allow Mrs. Stevens to select professional learning opportunity to help with student engagement and classroom management. One may have an assistant could be receptive of the action plan, or she can refuse any assistance if decided not to accept any criticism from her observation. The principal, school board, Mrs. Stevens, and the department head needs to be informed about this plan. I will deal with Mrs. Stevens directly during the pre and post observation meeting instead of leaving a note in a mailbox. And what would be my plan B? If Mrs. Stevens refused to follow the action plan, she would be assigned a mentor next school year and be placed on an improvement plan. If there are no future improvements, she will be terminated. Section 10. Correlation to standards. My case study correlates to the standards because I was able to use the information from a past case study to create, design, and implement an action plan and process for improvement about teacher personal evaluation. This assignment made me analyze a case study, find missing information, interpret, and develop an action plan to provide solution to a teacher reacting negatively to a bad observation. In order to do that, I had to gather data using technology, explore previous modules about supervision and evaluation. In addition, I also communicated other information from this case to enhance the success of the school by providing an action plan to address how to deal with teacher supervision and evaluation. Relevancy. I think this assignment is relevant to my current learning because this semester I was learning about supervision and evaluation of school personnel. I was able to analyze and reflect on a case study about what steps to take when teachers are reacting negatively to an observation. As a future administrator, I will be in this position where teachers are not receptive of my observation reports, especially as a new administrator. I'll learn how to create an action plan to address a diverse group of teachers. I plan to engage my staff in professional learning, implement system of supervision, support, and evaluation in order to increase student achievement. Reflection. This assignment will impact my decision as future building principal because I know exactly what to do if a staff member as a future building principal, I will know exactly what to do if a staff member is reacting negatively to my observation. I would first create a solid action plan. I can use this assignment as a template to follow in developing this plan. Then I will make sure I involve the teacher in question and other school leaders while creating my action plan. This assignment made me realize the importance of actionable feedback and professional learning. As a result, I will also make sure I reevaluate my school actionable feedback and professional learning practices. Lastly, I will revisit the school hiring practices and make sure I hire the best talents in order to improve the future and current success of staff and students.